You know that feeling when you're scrolling, maybe talking to a friend, even just figuring out dinner? It always feels like it's your choice, right? Totally your own idea. But what if a lot of those choices, those thoughts, are actually, well, the result of someone else influencing you? Maybe subtly, maybe cleverly. We're just constantly swimming in this world that's designed to persuade us, often without us having a clue.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How often we are actually, in a way, persuading ourselves. Makes
Yeah.
the whole thing kind of invisible. And understanding that fundamental mechanism, well, that's really where we need to start today.
Yeah. Okay. So this deep dive, it's all about pulling back that curtain on persuasion and its bigger sibling, propaganda. We want to explore what it really is, how it operates, and crucially, give you the tools, the insights you need to navigate it all. Our sources for this, well, they're pretty comprehensive. We're drawing on an expert course, a whole load of academic research, some really striking historical examples, and practical frameworks. The goal is really to help you become a more informed, more critical consumer of all the information hitting you.
Exactly. Let's try and unpack some of those hidden mechanics of influence.
Okay, you mentioned that idea of persuading ourselves. It makes me think back to my childhood. I was terrified, absolute terrified of learning to ride a bike. My parents tried, everything. Nothing worked. Couldn't get past the fear. Then my friend Mandy, she just started talking about it differently. Painted this picture, independence, adventure, all the fun we'd have. She helped me see the possibility. And when she offered to teach me, it didn't feel like being pushed. It felt like I decided I wanted to learn.
That bicycle story, it's perfect. It really captures the essence. Because successful persuasion, it's not just about changing someone's mind. It's about the person being persuaded, the persuadee feeling like they still have free will.
Ah,
It's definitely an intentional act. There's communication involved, aimed at changing an attitude or a behavior. But that feeling of having free will, of making the choice yourself, that's crucial.
so if that feeling, that perception of free will gets removed, what happens then? Where does that take us?
Well, that's when we start moving towards persuasions, let's say darker siblings. Take coercion. If you feel your free will is compromised, you're being coerced. Think about a parent telling a 6-year-old, no dessert unless you eat your vegetables. Now, for that kid, that can feel like a huge threat, almost existential, right? It feels like their choice is gone.
Yeah, okay. It's not a bank robber with a gun, but the feeling is constraint.
Exactly. The core is that perceived lack of free will.
Right. So you feel compelled. What about manipulation then? How's that different?
Manipulation is maybe more insidious, because here you do still feel like you have free will, but the persuader's real reason, their true intent, is hidden from you. Like a friend invites you to a dinner party, says, oh, it'll be good for you, you need to get out more.
Yeah.
You go thinking it's for your benefit, but then you find out their crush is there and they just, didn't want to show up alone.
Ah, okay. So you made the choice, but based on like false information.
Precisely. You were manipulated because the basis for your choice wasn't transparent. And that obviously brings up big ethical questions about trust.
And then if we scale all this up, like way up, that's where propaganda comes in.
That's exactly right. Propaganda is persuasion operating on a societal level. It's usually large scale, it's deliberate, systematic, trying to shape how whole groups perceive things, manipulate their thoughts, direct their behavior. And often, a key part is controlling the flow of information. It's persuasion, but with a much bigger, often hidden agenda.
It feels like the early 20th century was a real turning point for this kind of mass influence. You had the Industrial Revolution, literacy rates going up, newspapers, magazines, then radio. Suddenly you could reach huge numbers of people, this mass audience.
Absolutely. And it caused a lot of anxiety, actually. Sociologists worried about, unruly crowds, this idea of contagion spreading through media. Others, like Herbert Blumer, feared these sort of alienated masses just consuming confusing stories, losing touch with their communities.
But not everyone was pessimistic, right? Some saw potential for a more informed public.
Yeah, there was some optimism. Gabriel Tarde imagined this rational public engaging thoughtfully. Others, like Walter Lippmann, saw media more as a tool for experts to guide the public. And then you had figures like Edward Bernays, the publicity man, who were quite open about wanting to use media to, as he put it, engineer consent, to organize the chaos.
And around that time, mid-century, you had Lazarsfeld and Merton outlining what it takes for mass media propaganda to really work.
Right, in 1948, they laid out 3 conditions. First, monopolization. Yeah. Basically, no competing messages. No counter-propaganda allowed. Second, canalization. You don't create beliefs from scratch. You tap into ones that are already there,
Right.
like digging a canal along an existing path. And third, supplementation. The message needs reinforcement through face-to-face interpersonal communication. Your friends, your family talking about it too.
But they concluded this was unlikely in the U.S. at the time.
They did. They argued the private media ownership, commercial interests, freedom of speech, all that made these conditions hard to meet. So they thought mass media mostly just reinforced the status quo.
Which is chilling, because if you look just a bit earlier to Nazi Germany, they didn't just meet those conditions, they absolutely mastered them.
It's a terrifying case study. Monopolization. The Nazi government controlled everything. News, radio, films, even school textbooks.
Yeah.
No opposing views were tolerated, period. Canalization. They expertly, horribly tapped into centuries of existing anti-Semitism in Germany. They didn't invent the hatred, they just dug that canal deeper and directed it.
And supplementation.
That was brutal. Dissent was criminalized. The Gestapo encouraged people to inform on neighbors, friends, family. So interpersonal conversation had to align with the state's message. It created this terrifying echo chamber. It wasn't just shaping opinion, it was about crushing any alternative.
And this shows the different types of propaganda too, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Jacques Ellul talked about this. You have the overt propaganda of agitation, emotional, dramatic calls for big change, war, revolution, often blaming an outgroup, like the Nazis blaming Jews for everything. But there's also the more subtle sociological propaganda. This works by weaving ideology into everyday culture, entertainment, advertising, creating conformity almost unconsciously. Think about those anti-Semitic caricatures that were common before the Nazis even came to power. They prepared the ground.
And the actual tactics they used, things the Institute for Propaganda Analysis identified, they seem timeless.
Depressingly so. Name-calling, branding enemies as barbarians or vermin. It dehumanizes immediately. Transfer linking a leader or idea to respected symbols. Hitler constantly associating himself with German tradition, youth, strength. Card stacking, selectively presenting facts, like using bogus eugenic science. Glittering generalities using vague, positive terms like strengthening the nation to mask horrific acts. Bandwagon, plain folks. These devices pop up again and again.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. After World War II, the U.S. economy changed dramatically, right? Massive industrial power. People had savings from wartime rationing.
Yeah, a fascinating pivot. Suddenly, industry could produce tons of consumer goods, but people weren't necessarily used to buying them on that scale. Marketers had a new challenge.
So they had to shift how they persuaded people.
Exactly. It wasn't just about Listerine cures bad breath anymore. It became about cultivating desire. They needed to make people want all these new cars, appliances, even things like disposable plates. They had to attach deeper meaning to them.
This is where brands start becoming symbols.
Precisely. Meaning-making through association. Coca-Cola wasn't just a soda. Ads linked it to world peace, happiness, togetherness. China paper plates weren't just plates. They represented warm family gatherings.
Yeah.
It shows how persuasion can bypass rational arguments and tap directly into our subconscious needs, our desires for belonging, status, happiness, making things we want feel like things we absolutely need.
And Edward Bernays was involved here too, with motivational research.
He was a key figure, yeah. Advocating for studying the public mind, to understand underlying motivations and then shape attitudes accordingly. And often, the psychological mechanism was basically classical conditioning, like Pavlov's dogs, but kind of in reverse.
Oh, so?
Well, marketers would identify an emotion they wanted you to feel: love, security, excitement, whatever. Then find something that naturally triggers that emotion, an unconditioned stimulus, like a romantic scene, a happy family, an attractive person. Then just pair that stimulus repeatedly with a product, perfume, coffee, beer. Eventually, the product itself starts to evoke the desired feeling.
Wow, so the beer makes you feel like you're part of that fun group, even if you're just sitting alone.
That's the goal. It cleverly bypasses your logical brain.
Okay, so our existing attitudes, our beliefs, they act like anchors, right? They shape how we see everything.
Absolutely. They're cognitive anchors. We tend to filter information through them. We notice and believe stuff that fits our attitudes, and we often ignore or rationalize away stuff that doesn't. You know, if you really admire a politician, you're probably going to interpret their actions in the best possible light and dismiss negative reports as biased. It's a natural tendency.
So our brain takes shortcuts. But when we do encounter a persuasive message, how do we actually process it? This gets into the elaboration likelihood model, right? The ELM.
That's right, Cacioppo and Petty's model. It suggests two main ways or routes we process things. First is the central route. This is thoughtful, rational, logical processing. We use it when we're motivated and maybe the stakes are high, like buying a car, and we have the ability, the mental energy, to really scrutinize the arguments.
Logos? The appeal to logic.
Exactly. And attitude change that happens through this route tends to be pretty durable, resistant to future change. But then there's the peripheral route. Pathos, the appeal to emotion or heuristics.
The shortcuts.
Yeah, the mental shortcuts. This is much more common. It's shallower processing. We rely on cues that aren't about the argument's quality. Maybe dramatic music, an attractive spokesperson, how confident they seem, even just the sheer number of arguments they make.
Like that timeshare pitch where they give you lemonade and compliment your shirt.
Precisely. If you're not really motivated to dig into the financials, those peripheral cues, the nice atmosphere, the friendly salesperson might sway you. But attitudes changed this way are less stable, easier to change later. The key insight is how often we think we're using the central route when we're actually relying on peripheral cues.
Which makes sense given how much information bombards us. And speaking of emotions, fear appeals are a really common peripheral tactic. That 1964 Daisy ad for Lyndon Johnson against Goldwater, using the specter of nuclear war, that was powerful.
Incredibly powerful. And a key reason it worked wasn't just the fear. It was that it offered a clear, simple action to avoid the threat. Vote for Johnson. It gave people a sense of efficacy.
Ah, okay. So fear plus a solution.
Exactly. Contrast that with something like the old "this is your brain on drugs" ads from the 80s.
Yeah.
Very visceral, scary imagery, frying egg and all that. But often, they weren't that effective because they didn't always give clear, actionable steps for avoidance, especially for kids already using. The fear could just make people shut down or feel helpless.
So there's a model for making fear appeals work effectively.
Yeah, Kim Witt's extended parallel process model, the EPPM. It says you need two things. First, the threat information. The audience has to perceive the threat as severe, like really bad, and feel susceptible, like it could actually happen to them. If you show a texting while driving PSA to someone who thinks, oh, that never happened to me, it won't work no matter how gruesome it is. Second, you need efficacy information. That means showing clear steps to avoid the threat response efficacy and making the audience believe they can actually do it self-efficacy.
Got it. Threat plus confidence, you can handle it. It's a tricky balance.
Very tricky. Too much fear without efficacy backfires. Not enough perceived threat, and people ignore it.
Another subtle but powerful technique is framing. How you package the information.
Yes, framing is huge. It's about selecting certain aspects of a reality and making them more salient, more noticeable than others. This influences how we define a problem, what we think caused it, how we judge it morally, and what we think should be done about it.
The Hurricane Katrina example is often used here, isn't it? The language used to describe people taking supplies.
A stark and terrible example. You saw reports describing black survivors as looting a grocery store, while white survivors in a similar situation were described as finding bread and soda. The framing criminal versus resourceful survivor was heavily influenced by race, and it guided public perception and judgment in a really damaging way.
And this isn't accidental, it's used strategically, especially in politics.
Absolutely. Authoritarian regimes, fascists, they are masters of framing entire groups of people as threats, as problems, as other. And then, conveniently, offering the solution, restricting rights, surveillance, violence.
It shapes the whole lens through which you see an issue. Okay, what about less overt tactics, like humor and stories? They seem less confrontational.
They are, and that's part of their power. Narratives, good stories with characters you can identify with, emotions you can relate to, pain, joy, struggle, they draw you in. They encourage empathy, and that can lower your defenses. You might consider a viewpoint presented in a story that you'd immediately reject if it were presented as a direct argument.
You get caught up in the story, so you're not busy counter-arguing in your head.
Exactly. And humor, especially satire, works similarly through something called incongruity theory. A good joke often relies on a mismatch between what you expect and what you go by, like that old line about politicians in diapers needing to be changed often for the same reason.
Right, you have to do a little mental work to get the joke.
You do. And that cognitive effort, that processing of the humor, can actually disrupt your ability or motivation to critically scrutinize the underlying persuasive claim. It's called counter-argument disruption. Laughter can make you less resistant.
But humor can backfire too, right? The irony trap.
Definitely. Irony, where the intended meaning is different from the literal meaning, can be easily misinterpreted. The classic example is All in the Family. The show intended to satirize Archie Bunker's bigotry, but studies found audiences interpreted him based on their own existing attitudes.
So people who were already prejudiced saw him as a hero speaking truth, while others saw the satire.
Exactly. The intended message got completely flipped for a significant portion of the audience, reinforcing the very attitudes it aimed to critique. It highlights how our own biases filter everything, even humor.
This brings us to social identity, which feels absolutely central to how persuasion works today.
It's fundamental. Our brains are wired to categorize. We naturally simplify the social world by sorting people into in-groups, us, and out-groups them. This helps us navigate, but it also leads to oversimplifying. We tend to see people in our in-group as diverse individuals, while seeing out-group members as all alike. And we exaggerate the differences between groups.
And we like our own group better, right? In-group favoritism.
Strongly motivated towards it, we want to see our group as good, competent, moral, often leading to bias against out-groups. And this can happen incredibly fast, even if the groups are based on something totally arbitrary, like flipping a coin.
And we look to certain members of our group, the sort of ideal examples, to know how to act.
Yeah, the group prototypes. These shining stars, real or imagined, model the attitudes, feelings, and behaviors expected within the group. We look to them for cues.
And persuaders can manipulate which identity feels most important to us at any given moment.
That's identity salience.
Yeah.
And it's a powerful tool. Think about something like wind turbines. If my environmentalist identity is salient, I might see them positively. But if my rural community member worried about landscapes identity is salient, I might see them negatively. Persuaders try to make the identity that favors their message the most prominent one in your mind.
And our identities strongly influence the media we consume, creating these reinforcing spirals.
Absolutely. We seek out media that confirms our group identity, which then strengthens that identity, which leads us to seek out more confirming media. It's a powerful feedback loop.
And then came the internet, and that just changed everything.
Fundamentally. Remember, the early internet, ARPANET, was designed partly out of Cold War fears to be decentralized, resilient, with no single point of failure. Then Web 2.0 happened, MySpace, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. The focus shifted massively to user-generated content, interaction, many-to-many communication.
The old gatekeepers, editors, producers, they kind of lost control.
Their role diminished significantly. If traditional media had, say, one main door with a gatekeeper, social media blew 12 new doors into the wall. Suddenly, almost anyone could be a sender, reaching potentially huge audiences with little oversight.
Okay, so let's loop back to Lazarsfeld and Merton's conditions for propaganda. Monopolization, canalization, supplementation. They thought these were unlikely in the U.S. back in '48. How does the internet change that equation?
It flips the script completely.
Yeah.
What they saw as nearly impossible is now, well, disturbingly easy to achieve online.
How so? Monopolization first. How can you monopolize information online?
Through self-selection and algorithms. You can curate your social media feeds to basically only see messages that confirm your views, effectively silencing counter-propaganda for yourself. And micro-targeting allows advertisers, political campaigns, or even foreign agents to send messages only to specific subgroups who are already receptive, ensuring they rarely see opposing viewpoints. It creates personalized echo chambers.
Okay, wow. And canalization, tapping into existing beliefs.
Micro-targeting supercharges this. Organizations can now identify incredibly specific, granular, pre-existing attitudes, fears, and values within tiny segments of the population. They don't just tap into broad sentiments, they can find your specific little belief canal and pour their message directly into it.
And supplementation, the reinforcement through peers.
Social media is a supplementation machine. The messages aren't just broadcast at you, they arrive within your social network. You see a news story because your friend shared it, commented on it, liked it. The persuasive message is embedded in your interpersonal relationships, giving it enormous reinforcing power.
It's a profound shift, and like you said, a double-edged sword. It empowers grassroots activism.
Like the Arab Spring, Black Lives Matter, incredible examples of using these tools for mobilization and social change.
But it also opens the door wide for bad actors.
Exactly. Groups like Russia's Internet Research Agency, used in the 2016 U.S. election and elsewhere, exploit these same mechanisms. They use micro-targeting and network mobilization not to inform, but to spread false information, to stoke anger, division, and hatred, often with significant real-world consequences for democracy.
Which brings us squarely to misinformation and conspiracy theories online. How do we even define a conspiracy theory?
Generally, it's an uncorroborated, often unverifiable story claiming that powerful people are secretly acting together for some nefarious purpose. It's crucial, though, to distinguish these from actual conspiracies. Things like Watergate or the Tuskegee syphilis study did happen. It involved powerful people acting secretly with bad intent, but they are relatively rare and eventually uncovered by evidence.
Whereas conspiracy theories like the moon landing being faked or COVID vaccines having microchips are widespread, often easily disproven, but persist anyway.
Right. And a key feature is that they're often self-sealing. Any evidence that contradicts the theory, that's just dismissed as part of the cover-up. Or twisted to become more proof of the conspiracy's reach. It makes them almost impossible to debunk with facts alone for true believers.
So why do people fall for them? What's the appeal?
Psychologists point to three main types of motives. First, epistemic motives. Basically, the need to understand the world, find patterns, make sense of confusing or scary events. We dislike ambiguity. We want answers, what's called a need for cognitive closure. Conspiracy theories offer simple, albeit wrong, explanations.
Okay, the need for answers. What else?
Existential motives. The need to feel safe, secure, and in control. In chaotic times, blaming a secret, powerful group can, paradoxically, feel comforting. It provides a target for anger and anxiety, making the world seem less random and more controllable, even if the controller is evil. Think about 9/11 trutherism or COVID being a bioweapon. It imposes a sense of order on tragedy.
Right, having someone to blame makes it feel less terrifyingly random. And the third?
Social motives. The need to belong, to maintain a positive image of oneself and one's in-group. Blaming and out-group political opponents, other countries, elites, can bolster solidarity within your own group. Election fraud theories, for instance, can help a losing side save face and reinforce their shared identity against perceived enemies.
And it's important to remember that disinformation, deliberately spreading falsehoods, isn't always about convincing people of the lie itself.
That's a key point. Often, especially in conflicts, disinformation is less about changing minds and more about coordinating group behavior. It's a signal to the in-group. This is what we believe now. This is who the enemy is. This is how we act.
Yeah.
Think about that fabricated story about Iraqi soldiers taking babies out of incubators during the first Gulf War. It wasn't really about evidence. It was about mobilizing support for intervention.
And ethically, this stuff just fails completely.
Utterly. Using the TARES test, truthful, authentic, respectful, equitable, socially responsible disinformation and conspiracy mongering fail on basically every count.
So understanding all these psychological traps, these historical patterns, these digital tools, it's not just academic, is it? It's about reclaiming our own agency.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally about empowering you, the listener, to recognize when you're being manipulated, to resist it, and to choose a more thoughtful, more critical way of engaging with the information you encounter.
So what's the best defense then? How do we fight back against the flood?
Well, encouragingly, research by people like David Rand and Gordon Pennycook shows something quite simple but powerful. Just encouraging people to engage their rational, analytical thinking, what they call an accuracy monitoring mindset, significantly reduces their likelihood of believing and sharing false news.
So basically, just stopping to think.
In essence, yes. The sheer speed of social media scrolling encourages mindless consumption, peripheral processing, deliberately slowing down, pausing before sharing, asking yourself, wait, is this actually true? Does this make sense? Who benefits from me believing this? That simple act disrupts the cycle. It shifts you from that automatic emotional reaction towards more central, logical processing. It gives you back control.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from that subtle feeling of persuading yourself all the way to, well, global digital propaganda campaigns.
We have. We've seen how persuasion taps into really basic human psychology, how its tools and techniques have evolved through history, from early mass media fears to post-war advertising desires, and how today's digital landscape just amplifies everything for good and for ill.
And hopefully you listening now feel like you have a better toolkit. You can maybe spot the difference between ethical persuasion and coercion or manipulation. You can recognize some of those classic propaganda devices we talked about.
And appreciate how your own emotions, your social identities are constantly being targeted, and how the platforms themselves can shape the reality you see.
So maybe a final thought to leave people with.
Okay, well, perhaps the next time you encounter a message online from a politician, in an ad, anywhere, and you feel a really strong emotional pull, maybe anger, maybe fear, maybe you feel really flattered, or maybe just a deep sense of belonging of, these are my people. Just pause for a second and ask yourself, who actually benefits from me feeling this emotion right now? And if the main tools being used to convince me are symbols, strong emotions, maybe some of those propaganda tricks, rather than solid reasoning and evidence, what does that really say about the cause itself? How logical, how virtuous, how ethical is it really?
That choice to slow down, to think critically.
To engage with your logos, not just your pathos. It really does have the power to change how you see things, how you react. And maybe Collectively, it can even help shape a better, more thoughtful public conversation.